A lot of what people don't like in the modern world is the feeling of depersonalization, dehumanization that we get through our economically mediated interactions. When we go to Walmart, when we order something on Amazon, we're connecting ourselves to supply chains that are well beyond our comprehension. When we apply for a job with one of these companies, it's just some arbitrary function that anyone could carry out with our appropriate skill set. It doesn't matter who we are. It matters what sorts of standardized functions we have been trained to carry out. And where our own personal qualities do matter in our economic lives, it's often in this growing market of online personality cults, and personas are commodified. It's a content producer charging subscriptions, collecting super chats. It's an OnlyFans girl simulating intimacy for men who have never touched a woman. It is someone paying for higher visibility for their Tinder profile. All of these things are trying to sell us the image of organic community, organic social interaction. And they're all mediated by this big tech behemoth, this thing that we can't fully understand. And all of it's directed by a teleology that we also can't fully grasp. It doesn't seem personal. It doesn't seem like this is Jeff Bezos's plan. It's not Mark Zuckerberg's plan. This is big tech. We refer to it as if it was this kind of AI mind already. And in the back of our minds, I think that's sort of what we fear. We fear that this technocratic system will gain sentience at some level and just start moving. And eventually it will discard us because we're outmoded. We need to be updated. Our humanity needs to be replaced by something that's more efficient, rationalistically efficient. So it's natural to react against that by doubling down on what makes us human. Our animal nature, our appetites, our bodily drives, our aesthetic judgments, things that machines can't do. Math, machines can do math, right? So that seems like if you affirm that rationalistic path and systematic analytical philosophy, well, then you're like in line with the machines or something. That's sort of the vibe that I get from people. The problem in our current social order is not too much reason. The problem is that reason has been instrumentalized by an elite mercantile class who are themselves motivated by appetite. You look at Plato's tripartite division of the soul. There's the intellect, courage, and the higher emotions, aesthetic judgments, and then there's appetite on the bottom. That corresponds to the priest class, the warrior class, and the mercantile class, or in morphology, the ectomorph, the mesomorph, and the endomorph. In the Hindu system, the gunas, sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. And in this age, we've gone past rule by god kings, rule by priests, rule by warriors in the Middle Ages for a time, although that was really more already instrumentalized by mercantile class. And then finally, merchants are just explicitly in charge. They control what happens in the economy, and everything that we do is subsumed under an economic paradigm. So merchants are in charge. They don't organize their goals according to reason. They don't create systematic philosophies with the output of an ethical system that aligns their values. Their starting point is their own bottom line. Their starting point is profit. Their starting point is their evolutionary drives. If we were led by a thoroughly reasonable elite, they would plan the sorts of technological developments that we see according to a coherent idea of the good. Not just this kind of runaway model where whatever earns profit proliferates. Whatever gains control proliferates. Because the elites are totally unrestrained in their appetites. What could rein their appetites in? Well, a feeling of courage, this kind of masculine, heroic asceticism, of valor, selflessness in a sense, but they're not of that type, so they don't do that. It could be reason, but again, they're not of that type. It could be a sense of connection with God, but they don't have any reason to trust in the idea of God. So when it comes to how we should organize our psyches, we have the same basic problem. Should we be ruled by appetite? Hardly anyone affirms that position, raw hedonism. Even hedonists, classically speaking, like Epicurus, would say that you shouldn't overindulge or you'll ruin your capacity for hedonic enjoyment in the future. So a thoroughly rational hedonism is already moderating appetite in some way. Should we allow our courage, our valor, our sense of aesthetic goodness and glory to guide us? Well, what you ultimately get is you want to go and march in front of the Capitol and you do stupid things because you're not using reason to plan. You are just following your gut, and this is what I want to do. You're going to have these big rallies, conventions, and you're going to be spun by a media which is so much savvier than you, and you'll often underestimate your enemy because that's what this kind of heroic archetype wants to do, to inflate themselves. It's like the Conor McGregor strategy of coming in strutting and feeling like, you can't be touched. It leads to errors if you try to organize your own psyche according to that principle. You can organize yourself according to reason, and that is what I advocate. That's what Plato advocated. Or you can organize your thought and life according to some ideology, worldview. That's still reason. Like Orthodox Christianity is a set of propositions, basically. It's a tradition as well, but it's a bunch of doctrines and dogmas that are packaged together. That's a rational system. So it acts as a rational system, as a philosophy. But it's not reason, the abstract that you're appealing to. It's this particular rational structure that you can't get outside of because it's not up for debate, because reason isn't the highest principle, as I was saying in that last video. Now, that might work for an individual, but can that work to allow groups of individuals to coalesce and form some kind of reaction to what's happening in terms of the elite mercantile globalists? No, because Orthodox Christians and Catholics and Protestants and whatever different sects are out there don't have some common thing to appeal to ameliorate their differences. If what you appeal to is my sense that this is right, that this book is inspired, it is 100% right, this tradition, this set of historical authors is dogma, is canon, and that's just it, and it's non-negotiable, well, someone else can put forward an alternative set of scriptures, an alternative set of historical authors. Or if you appeal to a kind of more Protestant inner light, some sort of sense of connection with the divine, well, two people can have different senses of what God wants them to do. Like, how do you mediate between these different positions? Ultimately, there's no mechanism to do that. So, why reason is important is not just to control your own passions and lead yourself on the best course. It's also, how do we cooperate? I go through a thought experiment for a second. Say you're in one of those escape rooms where you have a group of people, say you have 4 people in this room, and there are 4 paths that you can go down in the escape room. Each path requires the cooperation of all 4 people, but you only have time to go down one path. You kind of know what's going to be down these various paths, and say you want to go down path A and your friend wants to go down path B. You both feel like God is telling you this is the right path. I have this very strong feeling. The Holy Spirit is guiding me this way. Your friend says, no, the Holy Spirit is guiding me that way. How do you resolve that difference? How can you possibly resolve that difference? And if you can't start cooperating, you're just stuck. You're going to remain in the room. You're not going to win. That's basically the situation that we're in. The mercantile elite are slowly controlling the economy to a greater extent. They already own most of the land in the world, most of the resources. A handful of people, like less than 1,000 people, own most of the land in the world, the vast majority of the land, vast majority of the resources. They are moving forward with their agenda, their plan for what they want the world to look like. And of course, it flatters their own interests. And you are going to be stomped down underfoot with the rest of the peasantry of the world, unless you find some way to cooperate. If you have all these different camps who don't appeal to reason ultimately, then they can't ameliorate their differences. In that escape room game, you can reason, you can say, well, in path A, the objective is you have to step on this pad and it'll open this door. And I'm kind of playing it out in my mind. And I think if I step here and you go there, that'll allow our other two friends, I can see how I have an idea of how that's going to be solved. I have a plan and I can reason through why this plan will work according to the mechanisms that I see. I create a conceptual map of the terrain and I can therefore project and predict what's going to happen. And I see ourselves winning on that path. And you can explain that conceptually. That's a rational process. If you're going to actually map out the terrain conceptually, that requires judgments, that requires some kind of logic. That's reason. So that's what reason allows you to do. With reason, if two people mutually appeal to reason, and both of them subordinate their own will to reason, then you can reach rational alignment, and then the people's rational states subordinate their wills, and that creates an alignment of will, of goals. Using reason, you can build a philosophy that has a shared model, technically, of how things work, the same physics, same cosmology, same model of ultimate reality, same model ultimately of the good, right? Ethics is a branch of philosophy, and all branches of philosophy interrelate. So like, what's the point of rationalistic models? What's the point of science? What's the point of these philosophical worldviews? The output of it is a concept of the good. And if two people have the same concept of the good, then they align their wills according to it, and they can seek that common good. Right now, we cooperate through economically mediated paradigms where the elites get a cut of everything we do all the time. They align our wills not according to our ultimate good, which we don't even think about. We don't think consistently like what is ultimately good for us. We just kind of move along, and that mentality is encouraged by that same elite. They align our activity, our wills, according to their interests, according to our appetite, directing our appetite. That's their technology. That's how they do it. We have other possible means. You can also have a charismatic military leader, a big personality that people gravitate toward. They're not rationally subordinating their wills. Their will just starts to resonate with a larger will that they appreciate and maybe they identify with in some degree. And so you can have that big man leadership, but those models are very bad at scaling and they don't last. And generally, people like that today cannot compete against the technocratic system built by the globalists. They have too much control over spin, too much control over information, the platforms of disseminating information. You can underestimate your enemy. And like I said, that type is prone to underestimate its enemy But that strategy, like, it can create a tribal confederacy. It can create the Mongol Empire, right? You can have Genghis Khan, this big man with a big personality, come around and create something. But within a couple generations, the vast empire created broke up because there's just a problem of scaling with that kind of organization. And also, do you want to be somebody's beta orbiter? Do you want just to submit and go supine for some big man that you appreciate? Like, it's kind of, I don't know, I guess the word is sus. Like, is that what you want? Because how else are you going to coordinate your behavior? How are you going to cooperate with others? If you don't cooperate with others, you're going to be smushed underfoot by globalists. That's just it. Your kids, you're screwing over your kids. You're leaving your kids up a creek without a paddle. You had better opportunities than them. Each generation is becoming more and more trapped in a globalist paradigm where they are being farmed more and more. They're being enslaved more and more by this paradigm. So if you just want to ignore what's going on in the world, you're basically saying to the rest of everyone, like, screw you, I care about my own feelings. And that conduces to the interest of the elite. So if you don't want to cooperate, if you just want to go your own way, you're selfish, you're a dick, and you are screwing over the rest of humanity by your inaction, by your tacit compliance with the globalist elite agenda, which has led to so many negative consequences that I'm just going to assume you have a background with what they've done and why it's a problem. So if you want to cooperate with others, it's either going to be the aligned interests, aligned appetites. The elites mastered that technology. It's going to be centering around a big man, or it's going to be, we engage in a dialogue, and I say, I think path A is the best path. I believe, because here's the model that I've created. Here's how I expect it's going to go. I don't know that it's the right way. I'm not certain. But I've modeled this out, and I think this is the best strategy. And then you can reason through, well, I think path B is for these reasons. And then you can continue the discussion and get into deeper questions, related questions, build out your model, and eventually reach some kind of consensus. It is possible. You don't always reach that consensus, but at least you could have the discussion, right? That's step one, is opening up some kind of discourse. That's a way to cooperate. And you know what? While you engage in that discourse, your other faculties align too, not just your reason. Ideally, you want reason to align, but while you're talking, you start liking a person, you start sympathizing with a person, you start feeling like, yeah, they are kind of part of my tribe. They're part of my in-group. And your will just starts to align because you know the person, and the personality matters. But if you don't open up that space for finding a path, then you're all stuck in inaction, you're inert, you're playthings of social engineers. So I've been getting a lot of comments, people criticizing you rely too much on reason, you can't find the truth with reason. It's like, that's a rational proposition. To really, in the question, like, should we use reason? Yes or no? In that debate, you have to use reason to even answer the question of whether you should use reason. And if you come to this answer that no, the best path is to trust your feeling of what God wants you to do, if that's ultimately your answer, are you sure? How do you know that is the best path? To justify that, you have to appeal to some kind of reason, or you just have to declare it. And I mean, think about that pragmatically in terms of the ethics of, like, the everyday morality of discussion. You go into some kind of debate, like, what's your position? It's that I know that I should always follow this hunch that I have because God gave it to me, and I don't appeal to anything else. That's the end of my opening remarks. You're saying, like, I don't care what the other person says. No matter what they say, I'm right. And again, you're just kind of a dick. You're unreasonable. You can't be reasoned with. You can't cooperate on that basis. Do people understand this? Like, it's not like I want everyone to do super high-level rationalistic philosophy. It's that everyone has to agree that that in principle is the way to cooperate. And step one is opening the discourse, is having the discussion. Now, I feel a little crazy after all these years being on YouTube saying, the elites are doing this. This is my basic plan. This is why I think it's a good idea. What's your plan? Does anyone else have a plan? What's going on? Does anyone else have a plan? And saying, I will talk to anyone. I will open this debate and discussion up to determine which way we should go. And it's crickets. For years, it's crickets. That's the problem. It's that people won't appeal mutually to reason. Part of it is like you don't want to submit to the big man. And if one person has a robust rational system and other people don't, then it seems indistinguishable from the big man. And at least the big man who says it's a cult of personality, I'm right, I'm super smart, just follow me. Like at least then it's like, okay, well, I know what this is. Whereas if it's someone putting forward a system rationally and who will defend it, but you don't have the tools philosophically to assault it, then it's like a black box. It's like, I don't know, I don't understand what's going on here. I understand Thor. I understand the charismatic leader. I'm just going to go that way. But the problem there is that everyone goes different ways with different big men. And there's no guarantee that that big man actually has the plan. If you put your faith in the plan, and it isn't a good plan because that big man isn't ruling himself according to reason ultimately, looking at you, Nick, then you're kind of wasting time. You're going down that path that maybe doesn't have an outlet. You're not escaping the room. You're really just creating distraction and helping the elites at the end of the day. And I will say, like, Nick will assert his metaphysics through his religion. And this is what a lot of people do. Their religion includes their metaphysics, and that sets their ethic, determines their ethics. It's not up for debate. The foundation of their worldview is not up for debate. They aren't ruling themselves according to reason. They're ruling themselves according to a rationalistic framework, but not reason, which is always transcendent. Reason can always step outside and question. It can always go to another level. It's broader than any one worldview. It's always broader. And that's why like Plato says, the intellect is a window into the divine. It's a window into that higher realm. We can access higher beings through that faculty. But if you just say, this is what my thought is, and I'm not going to change my mind on it, well, then everything else in your plan, everything else in your concept of what you should do, what we should do, what politics should look like, everything else follows from that basic theology, metaphysics, ethics. And if that's not up for debate, it's like, how do you know that you're right? How do you know that your version of Christianity is right? And Nick even acknowledged he couldn't defeat Jay in debate. How do you know it's Catholicism rather than Orthodoxy? How does Orthodoxy know it's Orthodoxy and not some form of Gnosticism or perennialism? There's nothing else to appeal to but reason. The problem is we have been degraded in our capacity for reasoning based on our conditioning, based on our trust in scientific experts, our trust in this kind of rule by technocrat. And if something doesn't have a lot of data and charts, we don't tend to take it as seriously. Like literally the smartest person in the world, in America at least, Chris Lankin, has been out there for years giving his system, and again, to crickets, because people don't have the capacity to interpret that kind of thing. And it's not a surprise. Schopenhauer put his system out there for years, nothing. Now, towards the end of his life, he gained some notoriety, but philosophers who put out these vast systems that have a lot of technical implications even, Leibniz's system, they don't always catch on right away. Chris Langen's system. So it's like, I shouldn't be surprised that people don't want to listen to reason. but it is this kind of perennial truth, and the logic of it is so basic. And it's like, do you think, just maybe look at it in a different way, do you think reality is reasonable or unreasonable? Do you think things in reality exist for a particular reason? Is there always a sufficient reason for every being? Or are things just totally randomly what they are and there's no capacity for explanation? If you posit that, it's going to be very difficult to make any kind of decision. And why does reason work at all? If reality is unreasonable, why does math describe reality? Why does reason work? You have no explanation there. If reality is reasonable and you want to appeal to something else besides reason as your first principle, what are you doing, man? Like, basically, we have intuitions that are evolved heuristics. If reality is rational, these evolved heuristics model probability spaces heuristically. We don't fully map out every detail of every relation in our environment. We capture patterns and model them according to our past instantiations of these patterns. It's kind of a Bayesian analysis. If I see pattern X, it's probably surrounded by pattern Y, and these are distributed in different ways, and it's kind of an overlapping set of these. It's more like quantum computation than a Turing machine, where you are kind of mapping this probability space, but with a heuristic mechanism that simplifies, and that's what our intuition is based on. And because of this fuzz in the way it works, it's highly robust. There's no one failure point that ruins the whole judgment. If you have a feeling like, I don't trust this guy, he doesn't seem like he's on the up and up, most likely you're right. Maybe not for the reason that you initially thought, but if you have that gut feeling about something, generally in evolutionarily precedented circumstances, it makes sense to trust it. But the reason that works is that it is heuristically mapping more rational structures at more fundamental levels of reality. And because rationality using language is so plastic, is so broad, we can map an unlimited number of different systems at different scales. We can get that technical rational analysis of things given enough time. We rely on heuristics, we rely on intuition, because we don't have time for all that rational analysis. And there's also some kind of reality to the heuristic mechanism itself, right? It is a thing that exists. And in my own philosophy, these sorts of intuitive mechanisms actually have an influence over the actual rational system that manifests. It's like measurement influencing the position of the particle when the wave function collapses. You can watch my philosophy of or rather perennialist interpretation of quantum mechanics video to basically get an idea of what's going on there. So there's something, it has an effect. The heuristic process has a real effect that can't be duplicated by a rational process. That's why it's not that reason alone is the only good. It's that reason has to be above emotion and intuition. It has to guide emotion and intuition. You have to appeal to reason. You don't always have access to that, though. Just like you don't always have access to the company CEO. Sometimes the person in middle management has to just do his thing and make his own calls. Intuition sometimes has to do its own thing and make its own calls. And it's important. It's not dispensable. But if you don't accept that hierarchy, then what's the unifying principle of the whole? The whole individual. Like, how do you generate that unified concept of the good if you're always trusting your intuition? Your intuition may steer you wrong. It may direct you on a selfish path, right? Most of our thought process is subconscious, and we evolved to seek our reproductive interests. So how do you know when you, for instance, feel that God is telling you to go this way, there's an intuition, I have to go this way. How do you know that it's not just your evolutionary drive propelling you towards social status, wealth, greater reproductive prospects? Like, if we look at the antinomian Protestants, the people who thought that, God's direct personal revelation was enough, they would often, like, I want to manifest love. I want to create this big community of love, get very intimate with people, but also be the center of a social community and have other people trust my prophetic judgments. Well, what happens? You become the center of the social organism, community, you gain status, young women start to be attracted to you and you want to spread love. And then what, all of a sudden, you as the center of this cult have access to 18, 19, 21-year-olds all the time. You're not appealing to reason. You're not appealing to some higher principle. You're appealing to your feeling. What's going to happen? What has happened in those circumstances through all of history? When you don't appeal to reason, you appeal only to your own intuitions. They are liable to lead you down whatever path evolution wants you to go down. And evolution is, again, a heuristic kind of mechanism. It's not capable of projecting out into the future, analyzing rational developments, thinking about weapons of mass destruction, AI, threats to humanity at large. Those things require foresight and reasoning, and it's beyond the scope of our intuition. Our intuition has a certain scope of applicability. Reason goes way beyond that. It's not that it's only reason. It's that reason has to be on top. Otherwise, the question to you is, how do we cooperate? How do we cooperate unless we appeal to reason mutually? You can appeal to this particular tradition, that particular tradition, your own intuition, but all of these just are kind of islands, and there's no mediating instrument to unify these different forces. We have to be unified. We have to form some kind of block to sustain ourselves in light of what the elites are doing. So that's my position. That's why I say we have to rely on reason. If you want to debate me on this, you're more than welcome to. It's hard for me to understand people taking the opposite position. Let me know what you think. If you still think we should go another way, like even arguing for that other way will involve reason. So it's just a bundle of bizarre contradictions when you reject it. But still, let me know what you think, and let me know if this sort of clarified the issue. Thank you, as always, for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.